Right now, on Law and Crime Report, Idaho judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial in the case of Chad Daybell. Daybell is accused of tampering with the remains of previously missing children, J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan.
There is probable or sufficient cause to believe that the defendant, Chad Daybell, committed the offenses counts 1 through 4.
Plus, Judge Esther Salas speaks out for the first time since the tragic shooting that left her 20-year-old son dead and her husband seriously injured. In her statement, the judge calls for greater privacy protections for federal judges.
My family has experienced a pain that no one should ever have to endure.
Should this topic become part of the national dialogue? We discuss. And later, Los Angeles County District Attorney Jackie Lacey's husband faces charges of assault with a firearm. David Lacey was filmed back in March pulling a gun on protesters and threatening to shoot them outside the couple's home.
I will shoot you. Get off of my porch.
This is the Law and Crime Report, diving into true crime and all legal stories making headlines. It's Wednesday, August 5th, 2020. Good afternoon, I'm your host, Brian Buckmire, here at the Law and Crime Report. We've got a number of stories for you, so let's dive right in. First, the Chad Daybell preliminary hearing. We heard a lot of testimony over the course of 2 days, and the result of which landed Chad Daybell with the decision that the court came up with, saying there was probable or sufficient cause to believe that he did in fact commit those 2 crimes of concealing the bodies or the remains of both those lost children. Now, let's start off with the prosecution's closing arguments, where they wrapped up all of the evidence and said, hey, this is why we have probable cause.
I'm aware this court is very well aware of what the burden of proof is for a preliminary hearing due to the wide audience it reaches. I'd just point out that Idaho criminal rule states that if the court finds that an offense has been committed and that there is probable or sufficient cause to believe the defendant committed the offense, the court must bind that defendant over to answer in district court. And so, Your Honor, just a brief recap. On November 25th, the Rexburg Police Department was notified of a missing child, J.J. Vallow. The next day, their investigation begins. What they discover in the course of that investigation is that there's another missing child, Tylee Ryan, and they discovered that the last day she's seen is September 8th in Yellowstone National Park. They find evidence that on September 9th, Chad Daybell sent a text to his then wife, Tammy Daybell, at 11:53 in the morning about burning limb debris and burying a raccoon in his pet cemetery. That very same morning, Alex Cox's phone pings in that same area, that pet cemetery area on Chad Daybell's property. On June 9th, Tylee Ryan, who we've identified through DNA, is found buried, burnt, dismembered, portions of her in a green melted bucket, buried with animals in the pet cemetery. Through that investigation, they find that the last known sighting of J.J. Vallow was September 22nd. The last known sighting of J.J. Vallow was September 22nd. Similarly, on September 23rd, Alex Cox's phone pings on Chad Daybell's property. Near those pings, where those pings are located on the north side of Chad Daybell's property, on June 9th, JJ is found, wrapped in a garbage bag with another white garbage bag wrapped around his head, bound in duct tape.
All right, so that's just the prosecution's argument, but let's bring in our guest first, Emily Galvin-Almanza, the Executive Director of Partners for Justice, as well as Tiffany Simmons, a criminal defense attorney. Emily and Tiffany, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Tiffany, let's start with you. We saw this preliminary hearing and some of the arguments yesterday, and I think my guest and I gave the prosecution, if we're going to give them a grade, a D or a D+. But because the standard is so low, it was just enough for them to get through. Our main concern was they didn't really do enough to connect that Chad Daybell was actually the individual that committed this heinous crime. We kind of just really heard a lot about the heinousness of the crime. What did you make of the hearing when you first heard about it, or some of the facts?
Well, the facts that I heard about and what I seen of the case, like you said, in a preliminary hearing, you only have to prove that it is more likely than not that this crime occurred. So the charges that Chad is facing, tampering with evidence, etc., it's very simple to tie it to him because it's his property. Now, I totally agree with you. The state, they did not connect him to committing the murder. However, like we said, probable cause, it is like a mini trial. However, that burden is very low.
Yeah. And Emma, let's bring you on this as well, because I think that you and I often operate with cases, and Tiffany does as well, but probably you more than the three of us, operate in like more high profile cases where sometimes the letter of the law would say that it's that information should be suppressed, or maybe the people haven't met the burden. But sometimes we were thinking that this judge kind of already had it in their mind that they wanted to go in this direction, regardless of the evidence, because at times the evidence was somewhat lacking. Can you kind of talk to us about that, where the judge may kind of reach that conclusion, even if it's maybe not all the way there?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about the American system of jurisprudence is that we've opted to have a deeply human system. And what I mean by that is, in the ultimate question of fact, we put the decision in the hands of 12 ordinary people to decide who's lying and who's telling the truth. I think the humanity of the system trickles down into every aspect. And when we talk about the system as if it's a hard, clear system of laws, we're really not capturing the fact that everyone involved in making the decision about which laws apply, what those laws mean, how to interpret them, that's all very human. So when you have a case like this, you have a prosecutor who is, as you say, relying heavily on the horrifying nature of the allegations instead of focusing on what he's actually supposed to prove, which is a connection between this specific man and this specific act. And the reason he's free to do that is because of the humanity in the system. Because the judge, looking at such a heinous case and such a high-profile heinous case, now with attention and media and cameras in the courtroom, who's going to opt for caution in protecting himself and the system from criticism in letting someone slip through on very, very heinous allegations. I would tell any young lawyer who's thinking about criminal practice that it's probably more important to think about the personalities and the motivations in the room than it is to think only about the law.
Yeah, and that human effect does play into it, because while the prosecution did bring out a lot of facts, like the bodies are buried on Chad's property, the amount of time it might have taken, especially with Tylee, and the kids are buried there, it seemed like they had a lot of information about, like, these are how the bodies are found, these are how the bodies were, and then Chad Daybell is the owner of that property. And the main part that I'm going at is there was kind of like the ties between those two facts were at times somewhat weak, but because of the standard, they were able to get there. And I highlight that only because, and I'm going to show you the closing argument for the defense, I thought the defense had not an argument to make here. And then he started making me think, whoa, there may be some questions here, even if they're small and it might not carry the day. Let's take a listen.
The testimony, according to this prosecuting attorney, is that Mr. Daybell was married to Miss Vallow. That's doesn't provide anything. Not only doesn't it provide an overt act, it doesn't provide an agreement. Marriage is not an overt act towards a conspiracy, and marriage is not an agreement to conceal or to conspire. In addition, what they have is they have Mr. Daybell making a comment to a police officer. That is not an overt act to conspire, or an agreement to conspire as well. And then what they have is they have an obscure text message that says, I burned some items in the fire pit and I buried a raccoon. Now, they can suggest whatever they want with that, but there's been no indication of any evidence that this act took place on the 9th or the 22nd or 23rd or whatever day it was. And quite honestly, Judge, they don't even come close on the concealment of Tylee. They don't even come close on the concealment of JJ. And the conspiracy, they lack the agreement. And quite honestly, Judge, if this is what the evidence is in terms of an overt act, I would submit to the court that I understand the burden in a preliminary hearing, but they aren't even close on the conspiracy in either suggestion, that in either case, in regards to an overt act plus an agreement. I'm respectfully asking the court to dismiss the charges. They haven't met their burden, and I don't believe they provided any near the type of evidence that is necessary to even overcome that small threshold. Thank you, Your Honor.
So this argument kind of like carried a little bit of water from you, but I understand the standard to be a little bit lower than what the defense attorney is arguing here. If he made this argument at trial, maybe it would work, but at a preliminary hearing, no. Emily, what did you make of it? Because he's kind of bringing up some strong points, like I'm not seeing a connection between the two concealments and the conspiracy, because that's all that Chad's being charged with. There's no murder charges yet. I think we might see something down the line depending on the investigation, but he makes up some good points.
Yeah, I think that the fact that there's somebody else living on this property who is his wife, who has closer relations with the children, I mean, I think that that's certainly more persuasive at trial than at the preliminary hearing. I do think that the point he's making, which is the lack of overt act, right? It's not like, gosh, I hate to dive into these incredibly grotesque facts, but it's not like, you know, this is a brand of garbage bag that we saw him buying in the supermarket 2 days prior, and then the garbage bag turns up in this other place. This isn't like a direct connection. The prosecutor is asking the court to make a lot of inferences, to assume a lot of facts. And this defense closing argument does a good job of pointing out which facts are missing. I probably would have liked to see him delve more into the specifics of what's missing. I thought it was a bit of a 30,000-foot view. But I would also say that I think what I heard there seemed like a lawyer trying to be very, very careful not to say too much and trying to leave a lot of options open for later at trial.
Yeah, and Tiffany, kind of piggybacking off of what Emily is saying, we started to get a glimpse as to what a potential defense could be. Because I think we were all in the same boat before here, like, there's no defense. We're looking at all this media attention, looking at all the facts, and we're like, there's no defense. And I think that was somewhat of the surprise at the preliminary hearing, that we're like, well, maybe there's at least an argument, maybe not a winning argument, but we can hear an argument. It sounds like Chad Daybell might be throwing Lori Daybell under the bus. What do you think about that for a potential trial theory?
Well, that is a possibility. I believe watching his criminal defense attorney, I believe that he was poised, he was confident in what he was saying. He stood firm in his argument. And sometimes, like Emily said, the humanity side takes over. He made the best of the evidence that he had at the time. So, you know, it's going to be very interesting to see if that planted a seed for the groundwork of a defense of saying that he didn't commit this crime. Lori committed this crime. Even saying marriage isn't an agreement to conceal or conspire, that could be part of the theme that the defense is creating in this case. So I'm excited to see. You know, this is part of what I missed, you know, with the case. I only seen a little bit of it, but seeing this portion, it's showing me that the defense is not going to go down without a fight.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to play out, because even some of the facts that maybe were a little bit lost in the hearing. Chad was married to Tammy Daybell at the time, and she actually died a month after the kids. And so where Lori would be interesting to see how they're going to try to throw Lori under the bus, because she wasn't living on the property at that time. How that plays out, we're not sure, because we were talking about phone pinging and all the other forensic evidence that came in as to where Lori was at the time of the burial. That's going to be a little bit hard for Chad Daybell's attorney, but hey, he's coming up with something, so we'll see how that plays out. We're going to continue with more here at the Law and Crime Report after this break.
The court finds, after reviewing all of the testimony that has been presented here, as well as exhibits 1 through 31, as well as the argument that has been made by both the state's defense and the state's attorney and the defense attorney. The court finds that the state has met its burden of probable cause, and I find that there is probable or sufficient cause to believe that the defendant, Chad Daybell, committed the offenses counts 1 through 4 as designated in the amended criminal complaint. I will bind the defendant over to the district court, and there will be an arraignment set on August 21st at 9 a.m. That will be in front of Judge Boyce. It's my understanding that will be held remotely via Zoom, but I will leave that up to Judge Boyce.
All right, so there you have it. The decision was rendered, probable cause or sufficient evidence was found. And I just want to be clear, when I talk about the grade system, that the prosecutor did a D, just a pass. For another example, that's just saying, hey, if you have to run a mile in 20 minutes, that's what the prosecutor did. Now, they could have run it in 6 minutes. They could have blown this case out of the water, but it looks like they held back a lot. But the question becomes, if they hold back a lot in the trial, is the defense going to have more to talk about? Is there going to be a greater shift of like where this case could end? That's really where the question comes up. That's really what I'm talking about with saying they got a D. Not because the case isn't good, but they did just enough. Now, Emily, I would take that as that's strategy. In preliminary hearings, in suppression hearings, defense attorneys, prosecutors, we're not showing our entire hand. We're showing just enough to kind of get over that hurdle, and maybe at trial we're going above and beyond. But we know that when we look at preliminary hearings, we can kind of get a snapshot of the trial. And so when you looked at this preliminary hearing, what was the snapshot that you saw that you maybe didn't see before the preliminary hearing?
You know, if it's all right, I'd really like to pick up on something you just said about holding back the cards and the different roles of prosecutor and defense. Because, yeah, we saw a snapshot here that was strictly tailored to being about destruction or concealment of evidence. We did not see any attempt to paint a bigger picture of what happened, the events leading up to this, who's ultimately responsible, who conspired with whom, who started, like the full story that we would want to see at trial. But what I want to point out about that is, what's interesting when you lump prosecution and defense into the same category as kind of keeping their cards close to the chest is that the defense has an obligation to protect their client, and that means they have an obligation to only reveal the facts that are advantageous in that moment. They have an obligation to, in fact, present a limited picture when that is strategically best. But there's a real question about whether the prosecution should be doing the same thing. After all, prosecutors have a unique ethical duty to represent the people, to do justice. And so it's really questionable ethically whether they should be doing the same thing of concealing some things, holding those cards close to the chest, only revealing the most advantageous facts when they have a very different role in the system than the defense. So I would say, yeah, we got a snapshot, but should we have gotten a snapshot, or should they have presented the full picture?
Yeah, Emily, I might go a little bit even further than you, and I agree, because we have different ethical duties. I don't have the same ethical duties as a prosecutor. I don't think prosecutors should be allowed to do that. I think that if they've got the case, they've got to prove it to the full extent. I know that they can prove a case however they want, and so they can be tighter for suppression hearings to be within the scope. But in the larger scheme of things, in terms of their role in general, no, they're not the same as us. They shouldn't be doing that. They have a completely different goal and a completely different ethical standards by everyone's measure than defense attorneys. So I would wholeheartedly agree with you. Maybe even go a little bit further. But you're more diplomatic than I am.
I'll co-sign your further version of it. I got you to say it now. I'll just go with you.
You're more diplomatic and smarter than I am. I'll take the heat later on. But let's just switch gears ever so slightly, and let's talk about a judge who went through, by all regards, regardless of what side you come on the fence, a tragic incident where in the early moments of that day, she was celebrating the 20th year of being a mother, the 20th year of having her son. And after that day, after they're cleaning up after their son's birthday party, he goes to the door and he ends up losing his life in what we find to be one of the most heroic ways, even though a 20-year-old should not have to do this, in protecting his father. We find out a lot of details because this judge speaks out for the first time after the shooting. Let's go to Judge Salas' statement.
Daniel and I went downstairs to the basement, and we were chatting, as we always do. And Daniel said, "Mom, let's keep talking. I love talking to you, Mom." And it was at that exact moment that the doorbell rang. And Daniel looked at me and said, "Who is that?" And before I could say a word, he sprinted upstairs. Within seconds, I heard the sound of bullets and someone screaming, "No!" I later learned that this monster who had a FedEx package in his hand opened fire. But Daniel, being Daniel, protected his father. And he took the shooter's first bullet directly to the chest. The monster then turned his attention to my husband and began to shoot at my husband, one shot after another. Mark was shot 3 times. While my husband is still in the hospital, recovering from his multiple surgeries, we are living every parent's worst nightmare, making preparations to bury our only child, Daniel. My family has experienced a pain that no one should ever have to endure. And I am here asking everyone to help me ensure that no one ever has to experience this kind of pain. We may not be able to stop something like this from happening again, but we can make it hard for those who target us to track us down.
Yeah, I think we can all agree, and I would echo the judge's sentiments. No parent should have to bury their child. I saw my father do it twice. It's not something that you would wish upon anyone, so I wish her all the strength in the world. But Tiffany, let's talk about this a little, because we know the monster she's referring to is Roy Den Hollander, who was later found to be deceased just outside of New York City, actually. And they're doing a further investigation. And this seems to be a man who was on his deathbed, because I think he had cancer at the time and was terminally ill, and decided to start attacking, interestingly enough, women in positions of legal power, that being judges that he's been before. And he was this kind of like anti-feminist, misogynistic man who thought he was the one to kind of right these wrongs that were in his mind. And he did so in the most disgusting and disturbing way by seeking out these people in their home and shooting and killing their family members. I mean, take the story wherever you want, Tiffany. Talk about either her response or just the killing in general, because I know it's a lot to kind of dive in here.
It is a lot to digest, especially being a woman in justice. My prayers to the judge and her family, because I empathize and I not only stand in her shoes. I am not new to being targeted as well as an attorney seeking justice. So I agree with the judge. We need better protection of women in law. I am currently dealing with my own similar situation, and I thank God that I'm still here today. And that is just the honest truth. We need better privacy protection for those that are officers of the court. Although I am a criminal defense attorney, I'm still an officer of the court. So it is a tragedy that the judge has lost her only son due to her profession that she thought she was just helping. It would be a tragedy for us not to use this as an example, to do better, to do different. Because women, as well as men that are in our justice system, that are doing the right things, or maybe the unpopular opinions, has been targets. This is not the first incident that I've seen, especially in my state of Georgia. I've seen incidents like this where defendants have come and murdered attorneys because they were disgruntled. So again, I sit in her shoes and my heart goes out to the judge. And I pray that we all in the profession take a look at this and we determine something that is better to protect our privacy and to protect us from tragedies like this. Again, my heart goes out to her as she buries her son.
Let's listen to a little bit more of the judge and her statement about how this tragic day affected her and how she plans to go moving forward.
Currently, federal judges' addresses and other information is readily available on the internet. In addition, there are companies that will sell your personal details that can be leveraged for nefarious purposes. In my case, the monster knew where I lived and what church we attended and had a complete dossier on me and my family. At the moment, there is nothing we can do to stop it, and that is unacceptable. My son's death cannot be in vain, which is why I am begging those in power to do something to help my brothers and sisters on the bench. Now, more than ever, we need to identify a solution that keeps the lives of federal judges private. I know this is a complicated issue, and I don't pretend to know or have all the answers. But together we can find a way. Let's commence a national dialogue. Let's work collaboratively to find a solution that will safeguard the privacy of federal judges. Let me be clear and tell you firsthand, this is a matter of life and death. And we can't just sit back and wait for another tragedy to strike.
I think those final words of "we can't wait for another tragedy to strike" are very powerful. And Tiffany, I would join you in what you're saying as well, and to be honest, as a male attorney, I am very ignorant of a lot of this. When some of my female colleagues tell me about, well, I don't want to have a work phone because then my clients will call me any time of the day and some of the things they say to me are inappropriate. Or when I walk out of the building alone, I do feel that sense of, well, I didn't get the right decision for my client, and now their family and everyone's disgruntled towards me, and there is that fear of threat. I would say that this should be a national discussion, but also I think that maybe just put it on me myself. Maybe I should start looking out more for my female colleagues when they're walking out of buildings, keep my head on a swivel, because this should be something that we should come together as brothers and sisters in the well, on the bench, and start looking out for each other, because this can't be something that happens in our community. Emily, what are your thoughts?
Look, as I listened to this statement from the judge, I mean, I got really moved by it. I can hear my kid playing in the other room. It's a nightmare. But I guess my question is, why are we talking about ourselves? Like, why are we making this about us being special and deserving special protections? I mean, to me, the issue is no parent should have to live through burying their child. I think that, to me, when I think about this, I think about the issue of guns. I grew up around a lot of guns. I grew up with the argument that we all need our arms and our right to bear arms to protect ourselves against an overreaching government. I think that we've learned recently in Portland that we, the people, no longer have the power to take on our government in a revolutionary sense in that manner. So to me, the issue is that there's somebody who can go out and buy a gun and show up at a judge's house and commit an atrocity, but also show up at anyone's house and commit an atrocity. I think a really good example to look at might be California, where officers of the court are protected. In fact, when a police officer runs a government attorney's license plate in California, it just comes back blocked as a government attorney. There are additional privacy protections for officers of the court. I think that's great. I think it's important. As a woman in the law, I don't necessarily think that I deserve special protection more than a mother who's living in a neighborhood where guns are rampant and who has to fear for her child every day. So to me, the issue is, how can we protect all of us? How can we make it more difficult to acquire the kinds of weapons that allow this to be possible? How can we also protect everyone against the sort of total lack of privacy that our technology has created, not just about where somebody's living, but about what they do for work, who they're associated with, who their friends are, where they go on a daily basis? I mean, so much information about all of us is available out there on the internet. I think everybody deserves stricter privacy protections, and I think everybody deserves more safety from gun crime. And I think that if we make this issue about judges, we're thinking way too small.
Yeah. Emily, I was going to read stats about how since 2016, threats and inappropriate comments made towards judges have doubled to about 4,500 a year. I was going to talk about how judges and people in the criminal justice system, they're facing more threats, and the U.S. Marshals are tasked to protecting 2,700 judges. But I feel like that point is irrelevant when it's put next to what you said. This shouldn't be about judges or defense attorneys or prosecutors or women or men. It should be about us. It should be about how do we protect our privacies and protect us from this type of violence. And I think what you bring up is a great point of how we can start thinking about that. And I think it should be added to the national conversation about having protections for all of us. Because when a mother has to plan how to bury her son, I think we all have to kind of think about how we can fix that as a society. But we'll continue more with the Law and Crime report after this break. Welcome back to Law and Crime Report. We're switching gears now, talking about George Floyd, because body cam video was leaked. This does not seem to be something that was given to a news recording. You can actually see if you've looked at it. We can't show the video just now. We're going to show you some snippets of it and some stills. But even if you look, it looks like someone's recording with their phone at another screen, maybe a television screen or whatever it may be. This is the body cam video. And the body cam videos of the two different officers actually tell a lot about how George Floyd was approached and how he ended up on the ground, until the other body cam video that we all know and we have seen and has been really at the heart of a lot of the protests and a lot of the criminal justice reform that picks up there. Now, again, I'm joined with Tiffany Simmons and Emily Galvin-Almanza. Tiffany, let's start with you. We're getting a lot more of how this all started. And the very first thing we see in the body camera is the officer approach George Floyd's car for the allegation of giving a fake $20, a nonviolent crime. In some places it says a felony, so let's say a nonviolent felony to give them the benefit of the doubt, but with guns drawn? Like this, I understand people watch like cop shows. That's not the way this works. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Exactly. You are right. This is not how that works, especially for a nonviolent crime. If we look at what it was, a supposed fake $20 bill, that's financial. That's considered white collar crime. With Officer Lane and Officer Kung, if that's how you say his name, would they walk up on a white man in a suit that was accused of white collar crime with guns drawn and ready? So this was already premeditated, I believe, and they should be charged with more than aiding and abetting.
Yeah, and Emily, like I know in the past, the defense attorneys for not the former Officer Chauvin's attorneys, but the others, were trying to bring up this whole they're new officers, they don't really know what they're doing. Once I saw that body cam video, I was like, guys, you've lost that argument, because there's. I don't care if you're pro-cop, anti-cop, defund police, get more police. Approaching a vehicle with guns drawn and pointing at an individual that is not a threat to you, there's no information, that's not in their hand. I don't know where you find that. That's not in the handbook. That's not in the law. That's nowhere. That is some wild, wild west stuff, and that makes no sense.
So I think this is one of the reasons why the public really needs to see the actual videos of what's happening in these incidents right when they happen. Because when we allow a video like this to have to be leaked after the fact, you give a lot of room to police PR machines to tell a very different story than the actuality of what's happening here. And the actuality of what's happening here, like, let's be real, this was horrifying, and this shook a nation into a heightened level of awareness. But like 2 days ago, police pulled a family in Colorado out of their cars and threw a 6-year-old crying for her mother onto the ground and made her lie face down along with the rest of the family. So like, talk about approaching someone who's not a threat to you with aggression and guns, a 6-year-old. This is not something that has stopped since George Floyd. This is something that is ongoing, that is national, that is happening in every state and in every locality. And until we, the people, are able to circumvent the PR machines surrounding these incidents and actually see videos like this, which are hard to watch and awful and sickening, we're not going to be able to really change what's happening here or do away with it altogether.
Yeah. Now, there's another issue there that I know that many have kind of discussed. Well, he was high. First of all, not a reason for a death sentence. Let's just start that off. But if we want to go down that conversation, let's have that conversation. The reports are that he had 19 nanograms nanograms, very small, per milliliter of methamphetamine and 2.9 nanograms per milliliter of THC, the major psychoactive ingredient of marijuana. It's what gets you high, quote unquote. Based on those numbers, it suggests that he either used drugs several hours ago or a day ago. Like I was explaining during the break, I had, 2 or 3 beers last night as I was prepping for this. There's probably a very small amount of alcohol in my system. Am I drunk though? Those are 2 very different things. And so even if you want to go down that logical fallacy that he's high because he has minute amounts of drugs in his system, that does not make him high. That is not a reason for murdering him. That argument doesn't work, so put it to the side and never pick it up again. It doesn't make sense. But Emily, actually let's go to Tiffany first. The video that I saw from George Floyd, and the funny thing is, or can't say it's funny because someone died, ironic thing is, they go to his friends at the side of the car and they say, what's wrong with him? And they explain, he has had someone die in his family like that, where that person was shot while they're in their car. He is frightened. And he even explains that. He's like, yo, I had a boy die this way on me. My mother just died. He's explaining his trauma for why he's reacting. And even when they're forcing him in the car, he's trying to say, wind down the windows, please. I'm claustrophobic. Can you sit in the car with me? Okay, I'll go in the car. I'll just count to 3 and I'll go. And these officers just ignore it. They just say, you know what? We're going to jam you in here and then we'll figure it out. Tiffany, that doesn't sound like resisting to me. That sounds like someone going through trauma.
Exactly. And what we see is officers don't care. I spoke about police brutality 4 years ago. And what I said in that magazine interview, I said, there is a lack of empathy. There is a lack of compassion. I have to respectfully disagree with Emily's earlier statement about us seeing these videos. As a Black woman, why do we have to continue to film our own murders for people to see the reality? Right now, we have people that are traumatized, dealing with PTSD, on top of a narrative that is not controlled with the right information. So I do agree with Emily on that point. We have to control the narrative that is put out there. Because even if George Floyd was high or whatever, guilty people, they deserve to go through the justice system. Guilty people or high people, they don't deserve to die. We know the statistics of people that take drugs, that are on prescription drugs for even PTSD or trauma. So how dare them try to use he was on drugs as an excuse to murder him in cold blood? I am over the trauma porn. I don't want to see any more videos of us being murdered, attacked. And when I say us, I am saying the humans that live in the United States. It was horrible to even hear in Colorado that a 6-year-old young girl was traumatized again in front of her mom and her other siblings because the Colorado police thought that the car was stolen. Again, it goes back to empathy. It goes back to
Absolutely.
A lot of officers are doing what they want to do as opposed to doing the law and doing what's right.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I got to shift gears. I want to stay here, I really do. But we've got to talk about the charges being filed by the LA County DA's husband for pulling a gun on protesters who are on his front porch. Let's take a look.
Right now, get off.
Good morning.
Get off of my
Are you gonna
porch.
shoot me?
I will shoot you. Get off of my porch.
Can you tell Jackie Lacey that we're here?
I don't care who you are. Get off of my porch
will get off your
right
porch.
now.
Can you tell
We're
me?
calling the police right
Good.
now.
Good. Wow. He pulled a gun and pointed it at my chest.
So the story that a lot of us have is that these protesters were attempting to try to get a meeting with the DA. When they couldn't get that meeting with the DA, they showed up at her home somewhere in the wee hours, close to 6 a.m., and that was the response they got. But Emily, you've got a little bit more information for us. What else are we missing?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the reaction, this happened like on the eve of the primary, where George Gascon earned the right to take on Jackie Lacey in the general election. And I think those of us who were watching the situation were sort of shocked that DA Lacey's husband had come out on the porch with a firearm immediately before her primary election. But what's interesting about the situation is a lot of the reaction from folks who weren't following as well, you know, there's people at his home in the wee hours, like he's just defending his home, he's frightened, like it makes sense. And while I always appreciate sympathy and empathy and, you know, an open mind and heart towards people who are accused of things, I do think it's important to know that this particular group of Black Lives Matter folks had been asking for a meeting with Jackie Lacey for years, like an office meeting in a conference room downtown in LA. They had been not heard, and she had refused to give a meeting. And so they'd actually been protesting in the street in front of her home, like regularly every week for quite some time. This was a familiar group. So when he opened that door, he knew who he was talking to. These weren't like strangers in the night. This is a thing that had happened many, many times. And I think what we're seeing there is someone getting fed up and hitting the end of their rope, but certainly not any form of defending their castle in an appropriate and emotionally understandable way.
Yeah, I see where you're going. That makes a lot of sense when you do that background as well, and that's going to be considered for any potential charges. We're going to come back more with the Law and Crime Report with our last story for the day right after this break. So a disabled vet who has a medical card in Arizona for legal marijuana because he suffered from PTSD and traumatic brain injury was traveling through the state of Alabama and was pulled over. Now, he has a Purple Heart. He helped clear roadside bombs. But because of a small amount of legal marijuana, he is now facing up to 5 years in jail and is in one of the most dangerous jails, a jail that the DOJ actually had to file an 8th Amendment suit against because the people were not protected there from sexual abuse within that jail. And that's something that jails have to do under the 8th Amendment. And so now we're again joined with Emily and Tiffany. Tiffany, we'll start off with you. This case has so many issues that you can kind of talk to about it, whether it be vets getting service, medical marijuana, the egregious amount of jail time for marijuana. Pick any one you want. Go for it.
All right. Well, I definitely will speak on the elephant in the room. This Army veteran or veteran disabled vet, it is an issue. He is charged with a crime, and I'm going to tie it to his race and racism. There is no reason that a man that is a disabled veteran that has the medical proof to show that this medical marijuana is for a medical use, etc. There is no reason he should be facing 5 years in prison. And that's just my thoughts on it. You know, my prayers go to him and his team, and I just hope it works out for him.
Yeah. Emily, we got about another minute. You know a lot on this. I know you're passionate about it. Give us your take.
I'm just going to tear through everything is wrong with this case. I mean, absolutely, Tiffany's right. This is about race. A white man driving through Alabama would not have been stopped and treated this way in the first place. But at every stage, the system has prolonged his confinement, his suffering, has undermined his ability to live his life and succeed. They forced him to go back to a state where he no longer lives. They sent him to a substance abuse treatment program that rejected him because guess what? He doesn't have substance use disorder. He's using a medicine. And I want to tie this back to the Democratic Party platform right now, where the choice to legalize marijuana as a part of the platform was rejected. This is why we need to take that step. This is only police and systems can only abuse Black men and people of color like this because the law allows it. And it has to be part of our national platform to change the law that allows things like this to happen.
Yeah. The unfortunate part about this is sometimes you have to be the perfect storm in order for people to pay attention. It shouldn't matter that he has a Purple Heart. It shouldn't matter that he's a vet. It shouldn't matter that he put his life on the line day in and day out, clearing roadside bombs to keep me safe in this country as an immigrant, to keep other people safe as citizens. And then we get to this situation, we're saying, well, something needs to change. Because this happens to everyone. This happens too often and too many times, especially to a specific group of people in this country, that being people of color, and it needs to stop. Because this man should be doing a lot more than just sitting in jail in one of the worst jails in this country because he's trying to medicate himself from protecting us. Thank you, ladies, for joining us, and thank you, everyone, for being here. We'll go back to our regular scheduled program. We'll see you all tomorrow.